Good morning. I'm Haley Ficasello, and this is Englebrook Independent News Federal Crime Report for February of 2026, highlighting significant federal prosecutions and sentencings across North District of Ohio. These cases involve firearm violation, child sexual exploitation, large-scale financial fraud targeting elderly, drug trafficking, threats against law enforcement, and the abuse of public trust by a federal employee. We begin in Taldo. A Jordan national residing in Lucas County has been sentenced to federal prison after being convicted of unlawfully possessing a firearm while in the United States illegally. Hussam al-Najjar, 43, was sentenced to 27 months in federal prison on February 3rd by the U.S. District Judge Jack Zohari, following an October jury conviction for an unlawful alien in possession of a firearm. He was also ordered to serve 3 years of supervised release. According to evidence presented in the trial, al-Najjar entered the United States on October 26 of 2014 as a non-immigrant visitor. Approximately 4 months later, he married a U.S. citizen in Taldo on March 12th of 2015. However, federal investigators determined that al-Najjar overstayed his visa when it expired the following month, rendering his unlawful presence in the United States and subject to removal proceeding. Although immigration paperwork was later submitted to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service seeking for lawful permanent residence status, those applications were never approved. Investigators further uncovered that al-Najjar posted multiple photos and videos of himself holding and using firearms on social media. During the execution of the federal search warrant at his residence, agents seized a Glock Model 45 9mm pistol. Al-Najjar is currently subjected to a detainer for the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement and will be transferred into immigration custody following the completion of his prison sentence for the removal from the United States. A Lucas County man convicted of multiple child sexual abuse and exploitation offenses has been sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Darren Riebel, 53, of Taldo, was sentenced to 240 months by the U.S. District Judge Jeffrey J. Helmick, following convictions in two separate federal jury trials. At a November 2024 trial, Riebel was convicted of receipt and distribution of child pornography, possession of visual depiction of minor engaging in sexual explicit conduct. At a March 2025 trial, he was convicted of attempt sexual exploitation of a minor, production, coercion and enticement. Judge Helmick also ordered a lifetime of supervised release following his imprisonment. Court records show that between October 10th and October 15th of 2020, Riebel communicated through social media applications with an individual he believed to be 14 years old, who was in fact an undercover law enforcement agent. Evidence presented to the jury included sexually explicit messages sent by Riebel in repeat attempt to persuade the minor to send explicit images and engage in sexual act. In addition, investigators determined that Riebel had been receiving and distributing child sexual abuse material for nearly 8 years, from January 2014 through August of 2022. A federal search warrant executed at his residence uncovered extensive CSAM files along with evidence showing that Riebel routinely contacted minors online and sent explicit messages and images of himself. This case was investigated by the FBI Taldo Resident Agency Violent Crime Against Children Task Force. A former bank employee has been convicted of federal court after orchestrating a sophisticated fraud scheme that targeted elderly victims and resulted in approximately $2 million in unauthorized transfers. Following a 5-day trial before the U.S. District Judge J. Philip Calabres, Yo Kao's 36, a Chinese national, was found guilty of 10 counts of bank fraud, 4 counts of aggravated identity theft, 1 count of money laundering. According to court evidence, Cao worked as a quant analytics manager at an Ohio-based bank, where his role was to help protect customers from fraud. Instead, from 2022 through 2023, he exploited his access to confidential client information to target elderly customers, many of whom had not enrolled in online banking services. Kyle created an offshore email account in his name of more than 100 victims, enrolled them in online banking without their knowledge, redirected account statements to those emails, and then transferred funds directly into his own account. Victims ranged in age from 90 to 103 years old, residing in New York, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Washington State, and Ohio. Sentencing has not been yet scheduled. Cayo faces a mandatory minimum of 2 years in prison and a maximum possible sentence of up to 30 years. A Michigan man who drove from Columbus to Taldo to sexually exploit a child has been sentenced to 14 years in federal prison. Jermaine Taylor Jr., 27, of Grand Rapids, Michigan, was sentenced to 168 months by the U.S. District Judge James R. Neep after pleading guilty in coercion and enticement. Taylor has also ordered to serve 20 years of supervised release and pay $3,000 fine. Between May of 19th and June 6th of 2025, Taylor communicated online with undercover agents posing as a parent of a 9-year-old girl, expressing explicit interest in committing sexual acts with the child. Taylor drove from Columbus to Taldo to meet the child and was arrested immediately upon arrival. The investigation was conducted by the FBI Taldo Resident Agency Violent Crime Against Child Task Force. The final defendant is a large methamphetamine trafficking conspiracy, has been sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. Maurice A. Stewart, 31, of Akron, was sentenced by the U.S. District Judge David A. Ruse after pleading guilty to multiple drug trafficking offenses involving methamphetamine and fentanyl. Federal agents seized 379 grams of methamphetamine, 87 grams of fentanyl, and a Glock 19 handgun during a search conducted at the investigation, which was led by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearm, and Explosive. 2 co-defendants are already serving federal sentences. A former Veteran Affairs employee and his accomplice has been sentenced for stealing nearly $200,000 in government funds using a work-issued credit card. Dustin Jagger, 41, of Canton, and DeMarco McKinley, 26, of Cleveland, were each sentenced to 12 months and 1 day in federal prison by the U.S. District Judge Dan A. Polster. Jagger was also ordered to pay $198,183.84 in restitution. Investigators discovered dozens of stolen Apple devices, a loaded firearm, cash, and a fraudulent credit card during the investigation. A Mount Vernon man has also been sentenced to federal prison for making violent threats against law enforcement and illegally possessing a firearm. Jermaine Graham Woods, 34, was sentenced to 42 months in prison after pleading guilty to a firearm and interstate threat charges. Investigators documented numerous online statements advocating violence against police and government officials. Authorities also recovered video evidence showing Graham Woods firing a prohibited submachine gun at a shooting range. These cases underscore the breadth of federal enforcement efforts across Ohio, from protecting children and elderly to safeguarding public trust and holding violent offenders accountable. For continued federal crime coverage and in-depth reporting, stay with Englebrook Independent News. I'm Haley Ficasello.